Hi, my name is Chris Parkhurst. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I'm also the host of the Documentary Life podcast, a show that spans 140 episodes, has been downloaded in over 135 countries, and I've been producing for about 5 years. I decided to put each and every episode up here onto YouTube to sort of expand the audience, and as we say in the show, maybe inspire and inform some more doc filmmakers, hopefully like yourself. In the episodes, you may find some older, maybe outdated URLs, in particular any of the documentary filmmaking courses that we do offer online. If you have any questions about the URLs, simply look in the show notes on this page, here on this YouTube page, and that'll be able to take you where you need to go to. Other than that, I hope you enjoy the show, and it's great to have another listener to the Documentary Life. Have a great day.
Afghans are some of the warmest, friendliest people I've ever met, and it was kind of like love at first sight. Like I just kind of fell in love with this place.
Hello and welcome to The Documentary Life, a show that sets out to inspire and inform you on how to best live and lead your own documentary life. I am your host, Chris G. Parkhurst, and this is episode number 22. And it is brought to you by Barong Films, proud creators of documentary film, the Documentary Life podcast, and the Documentary Academy, our industry-changing A to Z documentary filmmaking program that will transform you into the documentary filmmaker that you've always wanted to be. Find out more at thedocumentarylife.com/academy. Some of you may know of my guest today or already have seen his recent documentary film, Saving Mes Aynak, which is currently available on a number of digital platforms, including iTunes, Amazon, and Netflix. If you're unfamiliar with Brent Huffman or his film work, let me start out by giving you a little bit of an intro. Huffman has directed, produced, written, shot, and edited documentaries and long-form videos for a variety of outlets, including the New York Times, National Geographic, CNN, PBS, Al Jazeera, just to name a few. His published written work has included the likes of CNN, the New York Times, Asia Society, Frontline, and Salon, again just to name a handful. Huffman has been making documentaries examining life within China and China's recent push into Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Saving Mes Aynak, his recent documentary, is about an ancient archaeological site in Afghanistan threatened by a Chinese state-owned copper mine. The film was awarded a $100,000 MacArthur Foundation grant in 2013 and a $50,000 Riva and David Logan Foundation grant in 2015. Saving Mes Aynak premiered at IDFA, the largest documentary film festival in the world. He currently is an associate professor at Northwestern University, where he teaches documentary theory and production as well as long-form video storytelling in the undergraduate and graduate levels. He specializes in international documentary filmmaking in Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. Huffman's work speaks to me on a number of levels, and I think will speak to many of you doc lifers who may also be doing your first film or two with a decidedly DIY approach, perhaps in a developing country or in a culture where your native tongue may not be spoken. Similar to what I did with my first documentary, Journey to Kathmandu, Huffman was producer, cinematographer, sound, and editor for his film, Saving Mes Aynak, and it was also shot in a developing country, in this case, Afghanistan. So it is with great pleasure that I bring to you my shared conversation with fellow documentary filmmaker Brent Huffman. Brent, welcome to the show. I'm glad to have you joining us here on TDL.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
You know, I think that I first came by you and your work via your Twitter account, actually, or someone else's tweet, perhaps. It was about your documentary, Saving Mes Aynak, which I looked up pretty quickly, realizing that it seemed to definitely be the kind of work that I tend to be drawn to, if not work on myself. Of course, I've been following your Twitter feed, ever since, and greatly appreciate sort of the journalistic bent to a number of your tweets. How have you found Twitter and other social media platforms? How have you found it in regards to getting your film and the message of Saving Mes Aynak out there?
Yeah, boy, that's a great question. I'm a big fan of both Twitter and Facebook, especially as you mentioned, to connect, specifically to audiences, to interesting people, and especially people that are kind of spread across the globe.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's really kind of magical to post something and then get people from 50 different countries all kind of
Totally.
commenting and retweeting. Yeah, I mean, I
Yeah,
think
yeah.
I think people that don't understand social media, I think don't understand that aspect, that it's not it's really isn't frivolous.
Hmm.
It's amazing, I think, to in one moment get everyone on the same page and hear lots of different perspectives, and for something like the Mes Aynak film, to spread awareness, to get the word out on something very quickly, and like I mentioned, instantaneously across the globe. It's pretty amazing.
What part do you think social media directly plays in a documentary filmmaker's lives? I mean, you've experienced it obviously very much so with this particular film. Why is it important for a documentary filmmaker to take advantage of say, social media the way that you have?
Yeah, so I mean, there's probably more than one answer, but I think maybe um, first step is to to build to kind of build an audience for your film.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, and it was especially true for Saving Mes Aynak. The film initially started before the MacArthur grant with a Kickstarter,
Right.
uh, you know, um, fundraising campaign. Um, and Kickstarter, like you mentioned, I'm very DIY. And the Kickstarter campaign was really just me, which I never, to your audience, don't ever start a Kickstarter campaign when you're just a one man person, because boy, it's overwhelming. But
It's
I
a
think
full time job. It really is,
it's
isn't
a
it?
full time job, and when people aren't donating, when you've got a slow day or a slow
Oh,
2 days, yeah, like it can really drive you crazy.
yeah,
But back with the Kickstarter and back to social media,
yeah.
I think what saved me was to find the niche group of people that really cared about this topic, where it was really kind of a life or death issue, and that really was the Buddhist community, and the spread all through Asia. Um, to them, I think they were kind of the hardcore group of followers that really wanted this film to be made, and really cared about the issue. And then on top of that, to connect to um, um, fans of archaeology, fans of cultural heritage,
Yeah.
fans of Afghanistan. I think it just kind of builds and builds upon that. But I think, as advice for new documentary filmmakers, you want to find that niche group of people that you know, you, that this topic means the world to them. That like I said, that is this kind of life or death issue. And with the Kickstarter, there was a Buddhist in Thailand who had never met me. We'd never communicated. Who just donated $10,000 because of the cause. Yeah, and it really kind of saved the camp.
Well, and that's the thing, right? They often say, and we experienced it ourselves in the last crowdfunding campaign we did with for our film Elvis of Cambodia. We experienced a similar thing whereby someone we had never met before, almost like this idea of like they call an angel investor, right? Someone just came out of the blue and threw a substantial chunk of money down, and we had no idea how this person knew about us and knew about our film and what the connection was. And they say when you run a crowdfunding campaign like this that it usually takes one or two of those people that really come out of nowhere, that throw something substantial, and it really kind of creates this energy and propels your campaign in the direction that you need it to go. So that's awesome to hear that you had a similar situation.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. The way you just describe it is it kind of reinvigorates a campaign, makes it kind of exciting for everyone again. And this person, did find the story through social media, so that kind of comes back to um, creating a Twitter account, creating a Facebook page for your film, and then really, as much as you can, trying to connect it with these international groups that really care about your topic. I think if you don't do that, it just would be everything would be difficult.
Right.
Yeah, much more difficult.
As documentary filmmakers, it is a big avenue nowadays for raising funds. And one of the things I just feel like I want to throw out there, and you can add to this, is that it's important for anybody who is first doing a campaign like this, make sure you mentioned start a Twitter account, start a Facebook page, but it's important that you're doing those things, the social media aspect of it. You better be doing that well before your campaign, because you need to have that up and running before you start your campaign, because you need to be kind of cultivating awareness and cultivating an audience, I believe, before that Kickstarter campaign happens, if you're going to be using a social media strategy approach. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. And you have to build trust and build rapport with
Right.
your audience. Yeah, so you're not just you got to make it clear that you haven't just created the campaign to fund your
Exactly.
film. That's an important note. Like
It is.
uh, the Facebook page for Saving Mes Aynak has, I think, almost 110,000 fans.
Amazing.
And what the fans really love are like pictures of Buddhist discoveries in Afghanistan, the Bamyan Buddha pictures.
Yeah.
Part of what you're doing is really kind of learning what your niche kind of audience cares about and what they want to see. So I think part of the social media, I think, is educating yourself too about who the fans are, what they really care about, what they're really interested in. And I think the more you can kind of play to what they care about, the farther you can reach, into that group.
Brent, where did the interest in journalism and documentary come from, and sort of when did you start practicing the craft?
Yeah, so good question. I mean, I think as a student, even back to like grade school and high school, like I was always interested in anthropology. I was really interested in painting. I used to paint a lot, and I was interested in journalism and reporting. And I was lucky to kind of discover documentary, and to me, it kind of combined everything I loved about these individual forms of expression. And then, I think what I love about the media more than anything else is the actual production, like you mentioned, the do it yourself kind of aspect. To me, if there's a story that I read about, and especially a culture of people that I come to care about and
Yeah.
find really interesting, documentary is a way to get there and to
Oh
kind of
man, totally. Totally.
immerse yourself in a story and a culture in some ways that you would never be able to otherwise. That you would never.
That's right.
There would be no avenue to like
Yeah.
become part of this family essentially, and
Ah, I mean, it's part of the addiction for people like you and I, isn't it? I mean, we're already interested in other cultures and interested in exploring that, and the documentary platform. It's like there's the finished film, of course, but man, I'm sensing this is probably the case with you as it is with me. That the documentary, the film, at the end of the day, of course, the film, what you end up with, but man, it's the process and the people and the exploration and the cultures that you delve into. That whole process is really what drives me.
Yeah, no, I'm 100%, yeah, in agreement. Yeah, I mean, you know as you know that a lot of documentaries are edited by someone that in some cases is no part of the film.
Right.
And in a lot of ways that takes everything kind of special about the process away in a sense, to never be kind of a part of the human story and the lives and the people you get to meet.
Right.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. That's everything to me too.
با ارزش‌ترین و مهمترین کشف و کاوش‌هایی که ما داشتیم در مس عینک که در قسمت حفظ و نگهداری ما تلاش و کوشش زیاد خود کردیم و حتی شاید زندگی ما به موضوع حفاظت خود کردیم و نگهداریش کوشش خود بود.
How did the interest in Afghanistan happen for you?
Yeah, Afghanistan. So I first went back in 2004, and I actually covered as a student, I covered the presidential elections for
wow.
a piece for PBS, and it was my first time, in the country, and it's just a beautiful, incredible place. The Afghans are some of the warmest, not talking stereotypes, but they're some of the warmest, friendliest people I've ever met. And it was kind of like love at first sight. Like I just kind of fell in love with this place. And it was back, I think, in 2009 when I read a first story about this copper mine project.
Yeah.
And it was a New York Times story that actually, it was kind of a strange story that focused on the copper mining aspects. So there's $100 billion worth of copper buried in Logar province at Mes Aynak. It's Taliban country. It's extremely dangerous. Mm-hmm. In the story, this New York Times story, it talked about Chinese workers trying to set up a compound in Taliban country to start the mining process. It was just this bizarre story. And then the story kind of talked about how our military was helping this process and was providing security for the Chinese. Just this weird story. And then as almost almost a footnote in the story, just a little mention was the fact that there's some kind of archaeological remains at the site that will probably be destroyed.
And there's that moment, that little nugget that you see as a documentary filmmaker that you think, wait a minute, that's the story right there.
I definitely felt that, but I was also really attracted too of just this bizarre kind of tangled mess of things, and this very surreal. I'm very interested in China's push into other countries. So right now I'm looking at
you and me both
at China and Pakistan. Yeah, I mean they're everywhere. Chinese companies are investing on this massive scale, like really literally everywhere you can imagine. But to take that to kind of another level, to bring workers in a really unsafe place, and have them kind of live their lives in this desert compound. It just sounded crazy.
It's almost science fiction-esque.
Yeah, right. Totally. It sounds like, like am I missing something that doesn't sound possible or legal or crazy story. So then, kind of like you mentioned, and I think one way documentary has changed, I think maybe since you and I have started working, or one big change is that if you want to get an international story funded, you've got to shoot some of it first. So you can't get big funding on an idea alone.
Right.
Or at least that's been my experience.
No, I think that's 99% of the cases nowadays. It's been that way for about a decade now. I would agree with you.
Yeah, and it didn't used to be this way, but some things that our predecessors used to do was just make stuff up, make up subjects, make up and then hope when they got there that they'd find some of those kind of things. But now I think if you want to do this international storytelling, you have to find a way to get your boots on the ground. And that was the older I get, I think I'm for probably worse, I'm attracted to difficult stories, and especially stories that seem impossible. Like so much with the story I was told, it can't be done. You'll never get access to the Chinese compound. You'll never get access to Mes Aynak. Right? It's too dangerous. It's and people even said that it's just not interesting. That the story is not interesting.
Okay, so let's back up for a second.
Sure.
What I'd love you to do is like tee this up with, a real brief sort of synopsis of what the film is like. That way, we have a little context for our listeners, for anybody who hasn't seen it, and then we can continue. So tell us a bit about what the film is.
Sure. So Saving Mes Aynak, it's a complicated story, but essentially,
Yeah.
there is a 5,000-year-old ancient city, a 2,000-year-old Buddhist site, and sitting on top of a 5,000-year-old Bronze Age site. An immense, it's about 100 football fields in size. This immense, sprawling ancient city that will all be destroyed by a Chinese copper mine. So this Chinese government-owned company will open pit mine this site. So this whole ancient city will be turned into kind of a gigantic toxic crater. And the film is mainly about Afghan archaeologists really risking their lives to try to save their own culture, to save this history, as the clock is kind of constantly counting down, and the Taliban are threatening them. So it's kind of a Indiana Jones crazy kind of story in a sense.
So you and I know this because we have worked in countries where there happens to be Chinese presence, whether it's political, whether it's financial, though that's always probably combined. You and I have worked in these countries throughout Asia. Help my listeners understand, because it can be confusing, why and how we talk in this case, in your film, how you can simply say, well, the Chinese have a company that's operating here in these, and they're copper mining, and they have a presence here. How does that work in these countries? Why and how do the Chinese have incursions into developing countries?
Yeah, well, I think we could spend the whole.
Oh God, yeah. I mean, even as I said that, I realized like, wow, we could probably talk all day about that. But I guess just give a real basic understanding of what does it mean when we say that there's a Chinese mine in Cambodia, or a Chinese road being built in Nepal or in Afghanistan in your case. Like what does that mean?
Yeah, so really simply, mainland China has an enormous population, and they're really hungry for natural resources. They need that. They need natural resources, as every country, I guess does. But China has much bigger, a much bigger bank account to pay for these things.
Right.
Almost any country that you can think of, they're not private companies, it's the Chinese government. There are government companies that are trying to buy and bring resources back to China. So like literally everywhere in Africa, the Middle East, all over Asia, all over the United States, any location that you can think of with something of value, there's probably a Chinese company involved. What's different in Afghanistan, or Chinese are involved in Libya, they're involved in some really volatile places. A Chinese worker can't sue the government. It's just not possible. So they can set up and unfortunately put their own workers in kind of dangerous situations with really no kind of liability concerns. And that's important to note.
That's a pretty amazing thing to understand.
Yeah. And it's not like if let's say and people. Chinese workers have been killed in Afghanistan at Mes Aynak. I'm looking at a Chinese involvement in Pakistan, and workers have been kidnapped and killed there too. Their families will try to get some compensation, but it's really difficult.
Right.
So in some ways, these government-owned companies don't have anything to lose, or I think they operate as if that's how they see it. So they can set up in Taliban country, and it's really sad and bizarre, but when I was visiting this compound at Mes Aynak, there were workers living in total isolation, in this very volatile, dangerous place, out in the middle of the desert, just separated from their families, and it's a really bad situation. Now for people like you and I to interview, the Chinese companies and interview the workers is extremely difficult. I don't know
Indeed.
if you've
Indeed.
yeah, really difficult. And in China, there's not a culture of being interviewed or talking to a camera.
Right.
So people are rightly so really cautious, and so that's one reason in the Mes Aynak film I would actually have loved a whole kind of Chinese segment, but it just wasn't working out. It was extremely difficult to get an interview with the head of the Chinese company and get on the compound.
It's, and I'm glad that you say that, and it brings up something that I think that is an important thing to mention, is that, and it was a lesson that I learned, and it was a lesson that I thought I had learned prior to this, but apparently I hadn't, and that was that, over the years, having worked in countries like Nepal, Indonesia, and Cambodia, and seeing a Chinese presence, Chinese governmental and business presence in these countries, really put me off to China and the Chinese as a whole. And it wasn't until I ended up, I've since been to China in Beijing. At one point, I had gone sort of 3 years concurrently working on commercial jobs. And it was, the time in China that I spent working there was a reminder of something that, again, a lesson I thought I had already learned, but I hadn't really. And that's you can't judge a country's people by its government. It's always dangerous to do that, because the time that I had working in China, I had a brilliant time, and I loved working with Chinese crews, and the Chinese people that I worked with were lovely, and I had great experiences there, and it really was a good reminder to me that you have to be careful judging a country and its citizens by its government. Does that make sense?
It does, and the first thing I thought of when you said that was the Trump government.
Yeah, well, yeah. Look at it in reverse now, right?
We're in this place where rightly so, people are judging, I think, America and whether
Americans, right,
whether to visit, based on kind of the crazy stuff that's happening with their own government. And my wife is Chinese, and so my kids are half Chinese. So
I did not know that. I did not know that.
Yeah. So I definitely agree with you. I think that the issue, though, and it's just like the U.S., is there's a big difference between what the government does and what just regular citizens do.
Yeah.
And just like I think I would be really critical of the American government and what's happening. I think the ways I'm critical of China is some of these issues and decisions that the government make, and some internal things happening within China, decisions that the government make, and the way that I think they affect Chinese government thinking externally too.
When I first started making documentary films, I was often making them entirely on my own dime. It wasn't that it was a conscious decision on my part, I just really wanted to get out and start making my film. Does this sound familiar to you? When you have a great idea for a doc and the opportunity to get out there and start shooting, you don't want to let something like money get in the way of that. And for a while, it may not, but unfortunately, unless you have unlimited resources, eventually it will. Not having money for your doc film will slow you down, reduce your crew size, your film production values and aesthetics, even the story you're able to tell. And that's not even accounting for the additional stress, frustration, and your inability to work on the project full time. We don't accept that for ourselves anymore, and we don't want you to accept it either. Money is out there for every documentary film, and that includes yours. Every day, money is donated or awarded to documentary films. Why not yours? The trick is in knowing where to look for it and how to secure it for your film. In the Documentary Academy, we have the most comprehensive funding module that you will find anywhere in any course on fundraising for your documentary film. We cover the A to Z on raising funds for your film, so you will never again be left wondering where the money's coming from. Enroll in the Academy today by going to thedocumentarylife.com/academy and start your journey to raising $10, $25, or even $100,000 for your documentary film. Tell us about the Afghan people, and let's talk about city versus rural areas. Obviously, a lot of Westerners are familiar through the press and generally negative press of a place like, say, Kabul. Talk to us about the Afghan people, and tell us what your impressions were in both the city and rural areas.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe take a small step back. So I grew up in like rural Ohio, and in Ohio and probably most of the U.S., like the stereotypes of Afghanistan are really, really negative. I mean, entirely negative, honestly. And
Totally.
and it seems like everyone. I teach documentary production. I teach my students that even highly educated people carry around these negative stereotypes. So the stereotype of Afghanistan is in some cases this thought that like literally everyone is a terrorist. Like you step off the plane and you're in a city of terrorists where there's like whatever terrorists walking around. So there's that stereotype, or the kind of flip side, the weeping mother whose child has just been killed, the suffering victim stereotype.
Right.
So what I think it's partly our job, and I think it's a really important job that we have to break the stereotype for the audience and really show them the reality. So
it's a big part of what we do, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I think if we fail at that, I think it's maybe impossible to reach an audience. So and in describing what Afghan people are like, it's going to sound like stereotype. I'm talking in stereotypes again, probably, or that I'm kind of romanticizing a little bit. But the thing I found in Kabul is that the Afghans I meet are highly intelligent, very educated, very aware of what's going on. So in this Mes Aynak story, they've heard about the story before. Can sort of ask. Could ask an in-depth question about it. And the culture, again, not to sound like I'm talking in stereotypes, but the culture overall is very warm and very friendly. As a guest in the country, it's not uncommon for a stranger that maybe can't afford it, but will invite you over,
right.
Feed you, give you a place to stay. And I've traveled all over the world, and I think I've never been to a country so kind of giving and friendly. And in Kabul especially, like young people are extremely interested in the U.S. and American films and American music. They're super curious, and so my experience has been overwhelmingly positive. And in rural areas too, I think rural areas, and I grew up in rural Ohio, where people could be kind of isolated and cut off. I think more of that happens in rural Afghanistan.
Sure.
But I honestly encountered the same kind of thing, this curiosity, warmth, and friendliness. One thing, again, to go back to the terrorism stereotype, is that the Afghan people are victims of terrorism, and I use the word victim, which maybe isn't the best word, but the Taliban is an external gang, basically, so they're not an Afghan entity, right? It's
Right,
almost
right.
like, I'm in Chicago, and it'd be almost like if a out of state gang, came in and tried to take over. That's
Right.
basically what the Taliban are. So there's this big kind of this stereotype that Afghans themselves are terrorists. It's kind of completely misunderstanding the situation. Really, they've been victims of over 30 years of war from the Soviets, from outsiders, the Russians and Americans,
Yeah.
the Taliban. But yeah, overall, just incredibly warm and curious, and that's one thing I really wanted to highlight in the film was that. So I'm not a character. I'm not a character in the film.
Right.
It's really almost exclusively told through subjects, and mainly Kadir Tamori, this archaeologist that is at Mes Aynak, and is just really kind of passionate and wonderful. And he has four kids, and he's daily risking his life to try to save this threatened cultural heritage. And he's getting death threats from the Taliban sent on via text message on his cell phone. He's not getting paid. There's all kind of drama at the site, but yet he continues to go to work, and he's just a really kind of inspiring person.
Well, let's talk about archaeologists, and let's talk about fixers and translators. Um, I noticed that you have your fixer translator, Najibullah, listed in the credits at the bottom of the movie poster, which is really great to see. Honestly, I regret not having done the same. For listeners of the show who have yet to have shot a film in a developing country, and maybe where the language spoken is not their own, tell us of the importance of the fixer or translator in your work. Tell us about your relationship with Najibullah.
Yeah, so I met Najib back in 2004, and he's just this incredibly wonderful person. So he used to be a surgeon, so he actually could tell all these stories about taking bullets out of people and saving people's lives, and he's just this these just incredible stories. And around, I think, maybe 2003, he started working with journalists and photographers and documentary filmmakers and that kind of thing. And he's kind of a quiet, unassuming person, but just has this really big heart. And one thing that's maybe most important, especially if you're working in a country like Syria or Yemen or Afghanistan or Iraq or something, where security, there's security issues, is you've really got to trust your fixer with your life. So when you ask how can we get access to someplace, or how we do something, the fixer's role really couldn't be overstated. They're so kind of essential in keeping you alive and keeping you safe.
Right.
And then in Najib's instance too, I think because he's such a person of integrity that people come to trust him, and I think he's really great in getting kind of access to situations that would be really difficult to get access to, and not like in a Hollywood producer kind of bull in a china shop kind of way,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
kind of the exact opposite. This very
Right.
gentle. Yeah. So he's kind of a miracle worker.
Miracle worker. I mean, I know who you're talking about, man. I can completely relate. My fixer translator in Cambodia, who I first began working with him in 2004, and have since used him many times in other projects, and he's become a dear friend of mine. He's one of the preeminent archaeologists in Cambodia.
Wow.
This kind of film and story, it makes me think of him, and it would be heartbreaking to him to see this sort of thing happening. Though I also suspect it would not be entirely surprising, since for him the Cambodian government has had its own well documented issues with corruption and the integrity of its historical landmarks. I remember a few years back, Hun Sen, the prime minister of Cambodia, was extremely angered when he'd heard that a landmine removal agency had basically cleared landmines from around the historical ancient city called Preah Vihear, which borders with Thailand, and you may or may not know. And the Thai government had been trying to lay claim to this area for years. Essentially, Hun Sen felt that it was in his opinion, it was better to keep the temples lined with mines in order to keep the Thais from trying to lay claim to the lands. Instead of having the history of the temples be discovered by archaeologists and then the temples shared with the public. A lot of crossover. But to your point about the importance of the fixer translator, I feel like from now on, I will definitely think more about putting someone like my fixer translator in the credits of the film. I love that you did that.
Yeah, no, I mean, and they're often these unsung heroes of these, of the New York Times and the Washington Post, and in a lot of cases, they're doing, so much of the work.
القاعده صرف یو کم تعدادي چې دا ټول ملت د حکومت په مقابل کې راپورته شوی دی، دا د حکومت مسؤلیت ده. دا منطقه کچېرې له چینایانو ناراضي وای، دا ټوله منطقه نو ولې دا مس عینک ته دا توغندي ورتلل، خو خلک تر خفه دي.
He's saying if people were happy with the he's saying please we don't translate it, this part that you said.
In the film, there's a moment where one of the local elders he's basically saying on camera that Al-Qaeda is practically a construct of the Afghan government. That in effect, whenever the Afghan government feels any resistance from its people, in this case, the communities who will be destroyed by the Chinese copper mines, those who disagree or rebel against, I guess, the will of the Afghan government, are called so by the government, are called Al-Qaeda. It's a very interesting thing for a Westerner to hear, right? It's quite a perspective. Hearing a citizen of his country speak so brazenly and negatively about his own government, and even speaking of Al-Qaeda in this fashion, as if it's a construct of the Afghan government in order to cover up, how its own people maybe really feel about the government. First off, why and how did you come to the decision sort of to include this footage in the film? Your fixer on the man on camera asks you not to use what he's saying, right? Why would they say this?
He said, don't. The person says that rockets are being fired. He said, if we were happy with the Chinese, why are we firing? Why are rockets being fired at the Chinese compound? And then he says, he specifically says, don't put that part in. And I do put I do leave it in only because I think it's so important.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great moment. It's very revealing.
So he's actually lost his village. So his village actually had already been destroyed. So he's kind of speaking because he's got nothing to lose.
Wow.
And in some ways, I think he's being kind of cautionary tale to other. And I think that's why I included in the film is this cautionary message is that these and it's not just Chinese companies or the Afghan government, right. It's any government, any company, you got to be so careful with the things that they promise you, and obviously there's a huge difference between what's promised and what's going to be delivered.
Right.
And basically, these villagers lost, 500, 1,000-year-old villages, forever, where there were, cemeteries and mosques and this long history, and those villages are gone, and they were promised these kind of big and amazing things and got nothing, and
now there's nothing left to show, and they've lost their history now and culture, right?
Right, they've lost everything, and what I wouldn't go as far as to say there's no Al-Qaeda in Afghanistan, but what he's saying is true in that the government, and all governments do this, will lump everyone together, so these people that have lost their rights and have no other means, to defend themselves other than, protesting or speaking out. Lots of governments will lump those people together as, as dangerous or, and it happened in our own country with the, Dakota Access Pipeline,
right.
which there are huge parallels. I mean, it's almost the same story with what happened there. And what's happening in Afghanistan. There were protesters there. There were documentary filmmakers being locked up.
That's right.
Being prosecuted, and so I mean, just enormous parallels between what's happening there. Even though I think Trump kind of fast tracked that all, to the kind of tragic end, and ironically, Trump is trying to fast track mining in Afghanistan too. So the parallels kind of don't end with the essential story. But no, yeah, I think that's why I ended up including in the film, because I think there's a lot of truth in what he's saying, about the government kind of branding you as an enemy, and all you're doing is just fighting for your home and fighting for food for your family and these kind of things.
Brent, something that I hope inspires my listeners, and you mentioned this earlier, is the DIY approach that you employed with the film. You shot, produced, edited, and ran sound. It's not a big sort of budgeted looking film, if you will, and that, of course, is not a knock on the film at all. I took a very similar approach to my Nepal doc, Journey to Kathmandu. The environment, the subject matter, the sensitivity for size of a film crew and or equipment, it really necessitates the approach and aesthetic. Would you agree with that?
I would, yeah. And for this project too, I teach, so I think there are a lot of aspiring students that would have loved to come with me and that would love to help out and probably would have done so for free. Yeah. But I think with this film too, it was just it was so dangerous and kind of unknown that it felt. And that's not to say I'm so glad we talked about fixers, because Najib was risking his life along with me, and maybe more so because he was an Afghan working for an American, and that never looks good,
right?
Especially to the Taliban. So in a lot of ways, he was risking his life to tell this story. But that all pales in comparison, I think, to people like Kadir that were getting these death threats on their phone, saying we know who you are, and we know where you live, and we know where your family lives, and if you don't pay us, we're gonna kill you. So in some ways, I think that do-it-yourself approach to you're probably like I am, you want to have an active role in the cinematography. You want to edit your own footage. Right. So I would definitely say that the DIY. I think the pros, definitely outweigh the cons.
It's interesting. Brent, I've had to take a step back with our current doc project. I think I mentioned Elvis of Cambodia. I'm behind the camera on definitely, I think, what will end up being a significant part of it, but I will not be listed as the DP. We hired out a DP for it, and I hopefully will hire out the editor position as well. But it is definitely it's definitely been a different process. Really trying to concentrate more on just being the director of the film and conducting all interviews and figuring out what that storyline and the threads are. It's definitely been a different approach. I think this, I think every film is different. When I talk about Journey to Kathmandu, or if somebody hasn't seen it and maybe I give them a copy or somebody has seen it and wants to talk about, I've always had this thing where I preface it by saying, just so you know, that was one of my, first ever documentary projects and blah, 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 blah. And I really have had to kind of coach myself to stop saying that because, and I say it because I'm afraid of how they might maybe judge something like the cinematography, right? And I really need to stop doing that, because it was definitely a film that, as I mentioned with you, the aesthetic was really a product, and the DIY approach was a product of, sure, finances are a part of that, but also, in your case and in my case, when we're working in these sensitive environments, having a crew is not going to work. Just having you there on the ground with your camera, it creates some sort of a change. You have to be really careful. And so when I really think about it, I need to stop apologizing for Journey to Kathmandu and think, that film is what it was supposed to be. And it would not have been the film that it is if I would have had a larger budget, or if I would have had an actual crew size on that.
Yeah, no, and I think you're right. Different films, kind of necessitate different things, and certainly, the big negative of the DIY approach is that you have to do everything. And that can be pretty awful sometimes, especially when there's technical issues or sound issues.
Sound, baby, sound.
Yeah, right. And you exactly what you mentioned. Like, you've got to you're asking the questions too when you're thinking about the story, and it can be, it can be overwhelming.
Yep.
But when part of that makes me think of Hooligan Sparrow, if you saw that, shot in China. I mean, that's a good example of the film really couldn't have been done any other way.
Absolutely.
And there's an intimacy, and there's an empathy of kind of filmmaker has the camera, and the camera are literally the filmmaker's eyes, and that as a storytelling device, I think can be really powerful. But yeah, it's certainly not the way every film should work or should function.
You were able to obtain 2 rather significant grants for this film. As I mentioned earlier, one for $100K via the MacArthur Foundation, and another via $50K via the Reva and David Logan Foundation. That's pretty amazing stuff. So, let me restate that. That's the stuff of dreams for a documentary filmmaker. First off, why did you feel that why did you think you'd have a shot at something like the MacArthur Foundation grant to begin with? And for my listeners, maybe you could explain a bit about MacArthur, who it's intended for, and why it's, considered such a prestigious award.
Yeah, so MacArthur is this legendary, incredible organization. They also put out the Genius grants, where I think a Genius grant is 400 some thousand, no strings attached. And that's not what this was, $100,000. But similarly, like, no strings attached. They don't. They'll never give you creative advice. I mean, I think their only main concern is they want it to, the film to be available, for free, ideally to a wide audience.
Right.
So that PBS is kind of the ultimate home that they want films to end up on. I mean, to take one step back, both of those grants happened really late in the film's life.
Right. I kind of assumed that. Yeah.
Yeah, which was obviously really not ideal, but when they did get involved, so the MacArthur grant kind of happened when really 85% of the production, if not more, was finished. So the majority of the film had been shot, and I had done a lot of editing already. So that's really where the Kickstarter and the crowdfunding come in. So to get me to that place, and I never expected that those grants would come through and would happen. Wow. And the real with MacArthur there is a new journalism grant, but for the grant that I had got, their documentary grant has actually gone away.
Okay.
But it's come back in kind of this different form. So
different guys. Okay.
Yeah. So I think that's exciting. I mean, it seemed like really bad news when this fund of money disappeared. So so the good news is it's come back.
Walk us through that day. What was that like when you received notification that you were going to be awarded the MacArthur?
It's a process, but you do get that stage where you either get it or you don't. You get it. I did get an email. The thing I would tell your listeners, or kind of advice, is that Like nobody wants to give money to someone that they don't know and that they don't know well. So I think that's the big advice is that if you're just kind of cold applying for a grant and the people running the grant don't know you as a person. I think much more of this happens in kind of in more of kind of a personal emotional way. Like we know this person, we know their work, and we're going to fund this new project, as opposed to somebody has a great idea and they deserve money.
Yep.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. You should long be in contact with these people, whether it's asking questions about the grant or the process, or and this is what you're saying, right? I mean, this is kind of what
Exactly,
we've
yeah.
been
And
our approach to it. Yeah.
And even better, if there's any opportunity, like if they put on MacArthur puts on some event, try to meet the people, introduce yourself,
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, the more they know you.
Did you do this, Brent? Did you go to an event?
I did, yes,
Yeah.
I was lucky to get kind of one-on-one contact with.
Oof, that's great.
Yeah, yeah, and then with the Riva and David the David and Riva Logan Foundation grant. David Logan was at Full Frame, as you saw the finished film at Full Frame, and then like just actually came up to me in an elevator and started talking to me.
Oh, that's the best.
But I mean, the funny story is he asked me something like, what would you do with $100,000? And I gave the wrong answer then.
No way.
I blew it in the elevator. So that funding actually didn't come through until, I don't know.
How did you find out later on that, hey, remember that conversation we had in the elevator? You gave me the wrong answer at the time.
Well, he never said that. He never said I gave the wrong answer. I just know I did.
Okay.
And that's another thing, that's another a bit of advice is to know what they want to hear.
Totally. Yeah.
So like with MacArthur, if you said, well, we're going to make this film for HBO, like right away, you're dead in the water.
Yeah, right.
They don't like what HBO does, because it's this model of, you have to buy HBO and it's expensive. But you would never know that, like, I love HBO documentaries, so you never know that was like.
That's right.
That was the answer that would blow things.
That would set them off. Yeah, right.
And the answer that I gave, the wrong answer I gave Logan was, basically this answer of, I would give it to the archaeologists, and that is not what they. Not what they.
Oh wow! Right.
Yeah, that's not.
You can see why you would say that, though, right? I mean.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. So I don't feel bad that it wasn't like a
Yeah.
Like I said the wrong thing, but it's not what they want. Like they, and I'm sure you know this, but the nonprofit world. I mean, they want to. They not only want to know you, but they want you have some partnership with some other nonprofit that they trust, and
those things build on itself, like the same way with festivals, right?
Yeah, and because of their own stakeholders, like the way that the money has to be handled and reported on, like it's just much more complicated than what it sounds like.
Has the success of the film surprised you at all? And when I mean success, I mean in terms of the amount of places around the globe where it's screened. You have well over a dozen festival awards. It's been broadcast on television throughout the world. This kind of success, did you see this coming?
No, never. Yeah, never. And it's still, just last month, CNBC did another huge story, International Business Times, like it's
I saw the CNBC story. Right.
Yeah, it's constantly a huge important story.
Well, I mean, I have to ask how does an activist element in the film play into how you would define its success? And what I mean by that is, did you set out to stop the Chinese from mining Mes Aynak, or set out to get the Afghan government to reconsider the deal that they had made?
So yes. I mean that sounds like I assumed I had the power.
Yeah, right. I mean, it's super lofty, of course.
And I still don't, and I think, if and when the site is destroyed, like I will feel like I failed.
Yeah.
This is a super morbid thing to say, but sometimes I wonder if, and this is kind of an awful thing to say, I guess, but if something did, if I was killed by the Taliban at Mes Aynak, that would have saved the site probably. Like it would take something on that level. Like we talked about, I have two young kids. I obviously don't want that to happen.
Yeah.
But when I first visited the site, I did think, no one knows about this. No one knows this is going to happen.
Totally.
And it's not just that 5,000 years of priceless history was going to just be erased from the history books forever. I mean, it actually wasn't just that. It was that, this whole area was going to, is going to become this toxic crater where drinking water and rivers that flow into Kabul and flow into Pakistan, they'll be polluted forever. No one can ever return to this area again.
Hence the earlier North Dakota Access Pipeline mention.
Yeah, no, exactly. Same story, right? Cultural heritage disappeared, environment being, permanently destroyed, people losing their human rights, exact same story. So I did feel this obligation to, I have to get this story out there. And part of that was, like there was a short New York Times op docs I did, and I've been interviewed on CNN and some other outlets. And part of that was that, I couldn't wait for the film to be finished before I kind of,
started talking about it, or
started talking about it and kind of, set off this emergency, signal that, something terrible was about to,
timing wise, it's not I mean, as we see in the film, it's imminent at the time of filming, which now at this point is 3 or 4 years ago, and of course you thought that, right, that this is going to happen any minute now while I'm filming. So it makes sense to me that you were trying to have those conversations and get it out before the film could be done.
Yeah, and I think a big part of because my work and a lot of other people's work, because I think we were trying to raise awareness, that did delay the destruction. And,
it seems to be, that seems to be the case.
Yeah. And, the dream situation would be that none of this happens at Mes Aynak, that, mining doesn't happen there at all. I mean, right. I still, I'm still motivated by the hope that can happen, even though that, recently the Taliban and the Chinese government have joined forces, which is just, again, this surreal news. Like can that possibly be true? But the Chinese government is funding the Taliban to protect this this operation and other mining operations. And
what government in their right mind, Brent, would fund the Taliban?
Right. And Trump is president. We live in bizarre times.
Where can my listeners see the film? I mentioned earlier a few outlets, but maybe you can let us know again where we can see this.
Yeah, so easiest way, if you've got Netflix, it's on Netflix only in North America. I'm not sure if you've got listeners outside North America.
A lot.
Yeah, so in North America, you can watch on Netflix. As you mentioned, there's iTunes and Amazon. Yeah. There's a special edition DVD that's got, deleted scenes and all that kind of stuff that's for sale via Icarus Films.
Okay.
And then overseas, as you mentioned, Al Jazeera regularly broadcasts it, and there's a deal with them. There's a site called VHX where you could see the film digitally that way.
That's where I've got Journey to Kathmandu, right?
VHX is a great site because I think, and I'm no expert in this, but I think they allow lots of different translations, and you can easily add
which is really cool. Yeah, I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah, so I think that's the place where you could, if you wanted it to be translated, you can, you have lots of options there.
Brent, as we close our conversation, as I close conversations like this with guests, I like to ask about what we hear on the show. We refer to as this idea of a documentary life. And we kind of define that as how people are living while practicing their passion of documentary films. Because not a ton of people truly make their entire living from doing documentary films, and I have listeners who are teachers, who work for ad agencies, plenty who work in the service industry. This is what keeps them afloat while they make their films, right? I work in commercial and corporate video as a freelance camera op, and then as a director DP through our production company. How are you living your documentary life, Brent? How would you define that?
So that's a great question. Yeah. So
I mean, obviously you work at the university.
Yeah, I teach, and I think the great thing about teaching at a university is that I don't do I don't do commercials. I don't really do corporate work. That's
Right.
not really my thing. And then I can really kind of devote myself to these projects that I really feel passionate about. And I think I couldn't live any other way. Like
Yeah.
the documentary art form, and just being able to kind of immerse yourself in the lives of others, in a way that you just never could. I mean, I don't know another kind of art form that allows the same kind of thing. It is something I just couldn't live without.
So Brent, it occurred to me about halfway through this conversation that you might be somebody I'd like to talk to at some point in the very near future. I'm putting together I'm in the early stages of putting together sort of this 10-day workshop overseas. And it's basically a workshop for documentary filmmakers who want to know what it's like to do documentary film work in developing countries. And I would have other filmmakers be a part of this, and you are definitely somebody who would be a really good resource and an awesome instructor to have be a part of that workshop. And I'd like to maybe talk to you about that in the future if that's something that you'd be interested in.
Sure. Yeah. No, that sounds great. Yeah.
It'd be awesome to work with you. Man, what a great conversation. Having this conversation with you is very satisfying and fulfilling for me personally and professionally, and I think that translates well to my audience. And I can't thank you enough for being on the program. The film is Saving Mes Aynak, and as Brent and I have mentioned a couple of times, there are a number of places where you can see the film. And if all else fails, please check the show notes at the Documentary Life website, the show notes for this program, and I'll be sure and have some of your links up there, Brent. Thank you so much for being on the show, man. It was great speaking with you.
Great, yeah, no, and I totally agree. This was amazing, and thank you so much for doing this. This has been great.
You're welcome. My pleasure, man. And we'll be talking soon, huh?
All right, yeah, cool. Okay, have a great day.
Thanks, Brent. Take care, man. Don't forget, we'd love to have you join us in the Documentary Academy. Come and take a look at how we can help you make your best documentary film at thedocumentarylife.com/academy. That's thedocumentarylife.com/academy. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon. Thanks again for listening to the show, and remember to like and subscribe to this channel. Also, remember, for any of the URLs that may or may not be outdated, and you want to get the most up-to-date information, perhaps for the documentary filmmaking courses, for the blog, for other episodes, just go ahead and check in the show notes below on this YouTube page, and that'll give you the correct URLs to use. Thanks again. Have a great day.